cups that are produced by adding one worker. Suppose now we add a second worker. We add a second worker, we can get a little specialization going on here. We can have one person who's in charge of filling the machines, the other person who's in charge of staffing the cash register. Our total output goes up to 220 cups in a day. The additional output from adding the second worker is the change in total output, 220 minus 100, divided by the change in the number of workers, 2 minus 1, or marginal product of 120. By adding a second worker, the business can produce 120 more cups. This does not mean that the first worker is producing 100 cups and the second worker is producing 120. It may well be that the first worker, because their job is to answer the phone, is producing only 80 cups and the second worker is producing 140. What it means is that the business as a whole, by adding a second worker, can increase the total amount of cups of yogurt they're producing by 120. So adding a second worker to the business increases the business's output by, in this case, 120 cups. Suppose with 3, we are able to get 315. 315 minus 220 over 3 minus 2 is 95 on a good day. Think about Yogurt Park. Yogurt Park has only 3 machines and has had only 3 machines for the last 2 or 3 decades. Imagine if they tried to put 6 workers behind the counter at Yogurt Park. Couldn't do it. There's only 3 machines. They have to share those machines. As we add additional workers, we add additional workers and we've got one person who's in charge of filling the machines and somebody else who's in charge of the cash register. Or maybe we've got one person who's in charge of shooing the dogs out of the shop and the other person who's in charge of helping the customers. We can have some specialization in tasks when we add the first few workers, but if you add too many workers, they start bumping into each other because there's a fixed amount of capital for them to work with. And so what we start to see is the marginal product, the additional output from adding additional workers starts to decline because additional workers are having to share a fixed amount of machines. Question on the aisle. Will labor always equal 1? In this example, the denominator is always 1 because I'm going 0, 1, 2, 3. If I'd gone 0, 10, 20, 30, then we would be dividing by 10. So the denominator is a change in labor, which happens to be 1 here because I chose 1, 2, 3. Thank you. All right, what these numbers are illustrating is what's called the law of diminishing returns. The law of diminishing returns says that as the quantity of labor increases, all else constant. Whoa, what's the all else? We've only got 2 inputs. So if labor is increasing, the all else in this sentence is our only other input, which is capital. So as the quantity of labor increases, holding constant the amount of capital, we've only got those 2 inputs. That was our simplification. As the quantity of labor increases, all else constant, the marginal product starts to decrease. At some point, the diminishing returns kick in. And as we increase the quantity of labor, we get a decrease in the marginal product. I think the law of diminishing returns is not necessarily an obvious sentence or phrase. I like the law of decreasing but still positive marginal product. We're still increasing the total amount of output this business can produce. The marginal product is still positive. It's just smaller and smaller and smaller. So it's 95 instead of 120. Notice that the diminishing returns didn't kick in right away. I'll show you that in just a second. The implication of the law of diminishing returns is that if we want to increase output by some constant amount, we want to increase output by 100 cups, another 100 cups, another 100 cups, another 100 cups, another 100 cups. To increase the output by a constant amount requires an ever-increasing quantity of the variable input, ever more labor. Just the same idea flipped on its head. It's the reciprocal. Law of diminishing returns is the quantity of labor increases, the marginal product decreases. Flip that idea over, what do you get? You get that for a constant increase in the amount of output that's being produced, it's going to require ever greater increases in the variable input, which we're calling labor. Now, these diminishing returns kick in at a different point depending upon how big the business is. So for Yogurt Park, the diminishing returns may kick in with the 4th or the 5th worker because then people start bumping into each other. And once the workers start bumping into each other, then there's fewer opportunities for specializing the tasks and fewer opportunities for gains. And so those diminishing returns start kicking in when the labor, the variable input, is having to start really sharing the existing capital. If you're looking at Costco, though, for Costco, diminishing returns certainly don't kick in with the 4th or the 5th worker. Imagine going to Costco and having only 5 people working at Costco. Boggles the mind, right? I mean, you can't even get in the door without 5 people, right? There's 2 people checking IDs at the door. There's 2 people checking tags at the exit. If we have 5 workers, that means there's 1 person left to do all the cash registers and refilling all the thing and giving out all the free samples. And right, it's not going to work. So for Costco, we need a heck of a lot more than 4 or 5 workers before we hit that point of diminishing returns. The size of your business has a lot to do with when those diminishing returns kick in. All right, let's try that diminishing returns question again. Here we go. The law of diminishing returns tells us A, B, C, or D. Don't kick it. Same question as before. 3 seconds. 1. Oh, thank you. 2, 3. Happy. 92%. Yay. Much better. Big happy face. Now, I told you that when I was at that conference a couple weeks ago, I went on a tour of the Honda factory. And I'll have to weave in stories about that Honda factory tour as we go along. I'm running out of time today because I'm just too excited about Yogurt Park. This is Marysville, Ohio, which is the Honda factory that I went to. I don't know if you can make it out, but that's their test track. That's some sort of water, which I don't want to think about. And the factory, where did we go? We went in here. This here, that sort of looks like, isn't that just like dirt? No. That whole thing that I just outlined with the red thing, that's the factory. All of that's one building. You go inside, there's no windows. It's one large building with no windows. You couldn't take pictures, so no cell phones. We leave our cell phones in the hotel. There are a lot of questions they wouldn't answer, like how many people are working on the floor, they won't tell you. Where do you get your supplies, they won't tell you. Lots of questions they won't answer. But fascinating. Oh my goodness, fascinating. So you think about capital, fixed plant, that's capital, right? So regardless of how many cars they roll off the line at that Honda factory, that building is what it is, what it is. So that's their fixed input. Now at that Honda factory, here's a picture I found online that shows inside. So here's a guy working. There's the chassis of the car. These things are going overhead on assembly lines. So how many people have seen the I Love Lucy episode with the chocolates? Okay, so it's kind of like that but with cars. Sort of. They roll 1 new car every 60 seconds off the line. It takes them 16 hours from beginning to end to build a car. 8 of those are for paint. So it takes them 8 hours to build a car and 8 hours to paint and let the paint dry. They're rolling a new car off the line every 60 seconds, which means that every worker has 60 seconds to do their task. If they can't get their task done in 60 seconds, they could stop the line. They could press a button and stop the assembly line. It would stop the assembly line for the entire factory. That's like something you don't want to do if you want to have a job tomorrow, right? And so they have the labor divided up into teams of 15, and in every team of 15, there's somebody they call the designated hitter. Because one of my questions was, suppose this guy here who's drilling this, I don't know what he's doing, whatever he's doing, suppose he starts having a sneezing fit. I have allergies, so I can certainly imagine having a sneezing fit that takes a good 45 or 55 seconds, right? So what happens if this guy starts having a sneezing fit and can't finish his task in those 60 seconds? The designated hitter sees that the guy is sneezing, not doing his work, and runs over and does the work for him. So they don't have to stop the line. So presumably if he didn't have a sneezing fit but he passed out, the same thing would happen. Somebody would run over, take over his task, the line would keep moving. They call that on-site EMTs who would come and help the person who had passed out. So they have EMTs on site. So this thing's moving along. That's a lot of capital, right? There's a lot of capital involved in that. And they're producing these cars 1 every 60 seconds. So we'll talk about, I'll have all sorts of things I tell you because that was the most fascinating tour I've done in a long time. Second only to the cigarette factory tour I did like 30 years ago, except on the cigarette factory tour they offered us a sample, and on this one they didn't give us a free car. They gave us a pen. Okay. Fixed versus variable cost. So we talk about the fixed inputs. Oh my goodness, so many fixed inputs at that Honda factory. And we talk about the variable inputs. We use K to stand for the fixed and L to stand for the variable inputs. The costs of using the fixed inputs we call the fixed costs. We can use TFC for total fixed costs. The costs of using the variable inputs we call variable costs. How's that for creative? We'll use TVC, or we may just use FC for fixed and just VC for variable. So TVC for total variable costs, or just VC for variable costs. Add the fixed costs and the variable costs together, and we get the total costs. And we'll use TC to stand for total costs. So the fixed inputs, the cost of using the fixed inputs we call the fixed cost. Variable inputs, the variable cost, add them together, we get the total cost. The decision we're looking at today is that short-run decision of how much to produce. The short-run decision of how much to produce depends upon a comparison of these costs of production and the price of the output. How much can you sell the output for, and how much does it cost to produce it? Those are the two factors that are going to determine how much output a profit-maximizing firm produces in any period. Remember that the key assumption here is that the goal of the firm is to maximize profit. If we've got a business that doesn't have maximizing profit as their goal, then there's going to be a different sort of decision-making than what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about businesses that have profit-maximizing as their goal. Let's start simple. Suppose that the business you own is already producing 1,000 units, I don't know, let's put a time period on it, 1,000 units per hour, that's fine. And your goal, remember, is to maximize profit. A penny of profit is better than no profit. And suppose that if you were to increase your production to 1,001, the additional cost of producing that 1,001 unit would be $1, and the additional revenue from producing that 1,001 first unit would be $1.10. Yes or no? Should you produce that 1,000 first unit if your goal is to maximize profit? Yes, because the change in revenues are greater than the costs, and so yep, you're going to produce that 1,000 first unit because that will increase your cost by only $1, increase your revenue by $1.10, increasing your profit by a dime. Suppose instead you're already producing 2,000 units, and you figure that to produce a 2,000 first unit, your costs would go up by $1.15, your revenue again would go up by $1.10. Should you produce that 2,000 first unit? Yes or no? No, because your costs are going up more than your revenue. You don't want to produce that 2,000 first unit. The principle here is comparison of the marginal benefit and the marginal cost. This is a principle that underrides a whole lot of stuff in economics, not simply how much output does a firm produce. Almost any decision that we talk about in economics, we can talk about as a comparison of marginal benefit and marginal cost. When we compare the marginal benefit and the marginal cost, we ignore the fixed, or what are sometimes called sunk costs. I didn't tell you how much it cost to produce those first 1,000 units. I didn't tell you what the fixed costs were. That was not relevant. The question of whether to produce the 1,000 first unit considered only the additional revenue and the additional cost from producing that 1,000 first unit. It ignored the fixed or sunk costs of producing the first 1,000 units. In general, if the marginal benefit, MB for marginal benefit, is greater than the marginal cost of some activity, we do it. If the marginal benefit is less than the marginal cost, we don't do it. And if those two things are equal, then we're at a point where we're doing the best we can possibly do. If marginal benefit equals marginal cost, that's the best that we can do. You can apply this analysis not just to silly little things like how much frozen yogurt to produce, but we can apply it to things like sleep. Should you have slept 1 more hour this morning? Some people decided to roll over and whack the alarm clock and go back to sleep, because the marginal benefit of 1 more hour of sleep, feeling a lot better, was greater than the marginal cost of 1 more hour of sleep because you didn't have a midterm in your first class. If the alarm had gone off this morning, and if you rolled over and whacked that alarm, you were going to miss a midterm, were you going to whack the alarm and go back to sleep? No. So, I hope not, anyway. So the marginal benefit and the marginal cost, whether or not we sleep 1 more hour. Should we change our major? It doesn't matter how many courses you've already taken. Look at what's going forward. Those are sunk costs, what you've already taken. Is the marginal benefit of taking 1 more course in your major greater than the marginal cost? If you're at the point where you hate your major, think about the marginal benefit and the marginal cost. Marginal benefit greater than marginal cost, do it. Marginal benefit less than marginal cost, don't. Should we provide free vaccines? What's the marginal benefit? Well, marginal benefit of providing free vaccines is you have a vaccinated population, which lowers the likelihood of communicable diseases. What's the marginal cost? There's some marginal cost of providing vaccines. We can analyze that public health question by comparing marginal benefit and marginal cost, and we can do the more boring thing of frozen yogurt. For things like how much frozen yogurt, we're looking at profit maximizing decisions, and what we want businesses to do is to choose to produce the quantity where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. Question. What's the difference between marginal revenue and marginal benefit? Marginal revenue is an example of marginal benefit. So in those other things, you couldn't think about the marginal revenue of sleeping 1 more hour, but you think about the marginal benefit. The marginal benefit of producing 1 more unit is the revenue that you would get, so we just give it its own special name. Question here. The question is, why isn't it better to have marginal benefit greater than marginal cost? Give me 5 minutes today, and I'm going to guess a few minutes on Monday, and I'll get you to that. Okay. All right, let's look at the concept of marginal cost. Suppose that we've got a firm that's producing, now the Q here is the output. So this is the quantity of output, not the quantity of labor. The marginal product table we had, that was the quantity of labor. Now we're looking at the quantity of output. Suppose that the quantity of output is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The total cost of producing nothing is 70. Why does it cost 70 to produce nothing? Fixed costs. Because there are fixed costs. That even if they produce no frozen yogurt tomorrow, they still have to pay the rent, they still have to pay the business license. So a business that's closed on Sundays, it's not like they don't pay business license for Sunday. So even when the quantity is 0, there are some costs, and that 70 is going to be our fixed cost. If instead this business produces 1 unit of output, the marginal cost is the change in the total cost divided by the change in the quantity of output. And so the marginal cost of producing the first unit, 100 minus 70, divided by 1 minus 0 is 30. The marginal cost of producing the second unit, 120, is the total cost of producing 2, minus 100, the total cost of producing 1, divided by the change in output, 2 minus 1 is 20. The marginal cost of producing the third unit is 30. The marginal cost of producing the fourth unit is 40. Notice that the marginal cost went down, and then they started to go back up. That's the flip side of our law of diminishing returns. That when those marginal costs hit their minimum and start to go back up, that's the point where those diminishing returns kicked in. So when we hit that minimum of the marginal cost curve, that's where diminishing returns kick in. Let me show you more generally. This time we're going to put marginal cost on the vertical axis. Marginal cost is measured in dollars. At some point we're going to have a whole lot of stuff on our vertical axis, and so we're just going to call it dollars because we've got just a bunch of stuff we're measuring there. Along the horizontal axis we're putting Q, which is the quantity of output. So we're measuring the quantity of output. What we saw was that the marginal cost curve, marginal cost came down, hit some minimum, and then went back up. So draw what I like to think of as the Nike swoosh. Label it MC for marginal cost. This minimum point on your marginal cost curve, that's the quantity of output where your diminishing returns kicked in. A smaller quantity for Yogurt Park than it is for Costco. Diminishing returns kick in. Marginal costs increase. Marginal costs increase over most of the range of output precisely because marginal returns diminish. So the law of diminishing returns is the reason why the marginal costs increase over most of the range of output. Okay. Oh, I just said that. Marginal and average. Average total cost is to take the total cost and divide it by the quantity. So if it costs $400 to produce 4 units, then the average cost would be the 400 divided by the 4. The marginal cost, as we just saw, is the change in total cost divided by the change in quantity. It's the additional cost of producing 1 additional unit. This is very analogous. In fact, it's perfectly analogous to grades. You all have some sort of gut level feeling for grades, yeah? Suppose that you go into the semester with a B average. That's your average grade. Suppose you get A's in all of your classes that semester. Those are your marginal grades. What happens to your GPA? Does it go up, down, or stay the same? Goes up. If your marginal grades are above your average grade, you go in with a GPA of 3.0 and you get 4.0 in all your classes, that's going to pull your average up. Anytime your marginal is above your average, that's going to increase the average. That's how you pull up your GPA, by getting better grades. On the other hand, you had a 3.0 going into the semester, you got C's in all of your classes. Your average was 3.0, your marginal is 2.0. What happens to your overall GPA? Go up or go down? That's a unhappy one, right? Decreases the average. It's true for grades, it's true for costs. If the marginal is above the average increases. If the marginal is below the average decreases. We can show it in a graph. Again, we're going to put things measured in dollars on the vertical axis and the quantity of output on the horizontal axis. Draw that Nike swoosh thing, that's the marginal cost curve. The average total cost starts out above the marginal cost curve, and as long as the marginal is below the average, it's pulling the average down. As long as your grades in any semester are worse than your GPA going into it, it's pulling your GPA down. Whenever the marginal is above the average, it's pulling your average back up. And so what that means is that your average total cost curve, or your average grade, is going to hit its minimum right where it crosses the marginal cost. So the minimum of your average total cost occurs right where it crosses the marginal cost curve. I had one more clicker question, which I'm going to show you, but I'm not going to make you answer, because I had a picture on there I wanted you to see. So the last clicker question, where the answer, by the way, is B. You don't have to click in because I didn't open it, but it says, if you're feeling like, midterms in a week, there on Piazza, that's how you form study groups. So down there on the front where it says search for teammates, if you haven't formed a study group yet for Econ 1, that's how you do it. See you on Monday, lots to cover. Oh, Monday. Real quick, let's stop for just a sec. The IB 131 class that meets before us is having their midterm on Monday, so be patient in the lobby and let them all get out of here before you come in. So Monday, we gotta wait, let them out. Have a good weekend. Go Bears.